Hello, and welcome back to season 4 of Venus Rising. Wow, can't believe it. Season 4. I'm your host, Callie Fell. Today, I am really excited to speak with Genevieve Gluck, feminist, essayist, and co-founder of the pro-women news and opinion site, Reduxx. Genevieve has contributed work to Feminist Current and was published in the anthology Spinning and Weaving, Radical Feminists for the 21st Century. Genevieve also hosts a podcast called Women's Voices, which features interviews with women's rights activists, readings from feminist texts, and conversations about current events. Genevieve, welcome to the show, and thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Callie.
So I have been following you on Twitter, and you have been very, very, very busy launching your new website or co-launching Reduxx. So tell us about Reduxx. Why did you launch it? What do you hope to achieve out of it? Who is it for? Tell us about your website.
So Redux with two X's, which obviously refers to women. It's a publication that I co-launched with my friend Anna Slatz at the end of January this year. And we had been working together for a few months before on some other kinds of similar news articles, looking for stories and things like this. So we just thought, let's do our own thing. Let's make our own publication where we can talk about whatever we want. We don't have to kind of self-censor about the stories. And then we were also concerned about the way in which this particular issue, which is safeguarding for women and children, is being reframed as a anti-trans issue, but also that even media that does report on it tends to use confusing pronouns or incorrect pronouns for men. So even when it does get some coverage, there's still this confusing language. And so we wanted to have a space where we could just say things very simply or directly about what's going on. And since that time, we have published several exclusive stories that were only discovered by and investigated and reported on by Reduxx ourselves. Some of those stories I'm sure we'll get into later, but I've been speaking with women in the New Jersey prison, for example, about the impact of male transfers into the prisons. So we've been working really hard to try to reach out to people who are affected by this and to accurately portray the situation as it's going on.
Yeah, I recently watched your video of the woman who was banned from the YMCA and I was just so appalled by what was happening. And so I've become a subscriber. I get your newsletter, and I'm gonna tell our listeners to go online at the end and give the website where they can also join your newsletter, because you are really covering a myriad of things that women should be aware of, and we should be cognizant that's happening. So what's your vision for Reduxx? It's fairly new in its infancy, but what is long-term goals for Reduxx?
Well, in the long term, we would like to branch out from this particular issue. I mean, that's just a general problem for feminism at the moment. We're being kind of forestalled by this gender identity nonsense when we need to be focusing on some fairly serious issues that are being exacerbated by technology, which is kind of what you do exactly, right? So yeah, we need to be able to talk about all of the ways in which women are being impacted unfairly in society, and not only this issue. So in the future, we would really like to be able to to work on those more in more detail. And we are always looking for contributors as well. So just to keep in mind that people can reach out to us, send us an email through our website at any time.
Yeah. And thanks for that little plug there, because we had Jada on in season 3, who was a young woman who lost her mother to surrogacy complications. And I was a contributor for Reduxx. And so I appreciate that. And so folks who listen to that story and want to read more can go to Reduxx and find the piece that I wrote as well. So I appreciate that. So how did you get started in this space then? So you just started started Redux a year ago, or almost a year, coming up on your anniversary celebration. Did you always want to be a writer, researcher? What motivates you in your writings? Why do you do what you do?
Whenever it's hard to talk about this, but I guess ever since I was in high school, I really enjoyed doing research papers. I don't know why. Everyone else would complain about them. All of my friends would, moan and groan about doing it, but I really liked doing it. And then when I went to university, I started taking some media theory classes, which are, for those who don't know, it's kind of focusing on the ways that media impacts society. So it's not just simply limited to journalism, although I took courses in journalism as well, but it was more of the theoretical framework of, research on how people are shaped by various technologies and media, and how the media is influenced by things like companies and advertising and so on. So I found that to be really fascinating. Did I always want to be a journalist? No, because I had kind of the suspicion that journalists weren't telling the truth
Mm,
because of that corporate interest that I just mentioned.
mhm.
So I was more interested into the research angle of it myself, but I never saw it turning into I mean, who could have predicted this, right? We can't even, there's no way we could have predicted that we would be here talking about, whether or not women have penises, in the year 2022. So,
Right. Or that we
I,
still have to protect our spaces. Like, I'm like, we keep going backwards. Like, what is when I was reading about shelters, right? Like women's domestic violence shelters or shelters for women who have been raped, and how we're having to fight for those spaces to be only women too. I just felt like we've gone backwards, but I digress. I'll let you continue.
well, yeah, I would agree with that, totally, that the idea that women should have separate spaces is not a new concept. And the way that that's getting taken from us, I mean, I would even argue again about the prisons, that prisons should be single sex only.
Mhm.
And it does, like, we can talk about all the reasons behind this and how baffling it is for a long time, but I think what it boils down to is kind of the disbelief in the extent to male violence. I think that a lot of people are quite naive about some of the capacities for sexual depravity and violence that men are capable of. And of course, this is not a significant portion of our society, but it is a significant amount of violence that we need to be concerned about. So
Yeah, yeah, and we'll get to that. You talk a lot about the roots of the transgender movement and how how it's kind of rooted in some violence and some pornography, and so we can get into that in a minute. Um, I saw recently too that your podcast Twitter was put in Twitter jail for a while. And I was going to ask you if you felt, I have chatted with Megan Murphy and Libby Emmons, and, talking to you girls and women, sorry, you ladies, I get a little bit hopeful for journalism because I feel like here are beautiful examples of truth telling. Do you have the same hope for journalism and for writing? Or do you think, what do you think about
I'm a cynical person, I guess.
it?
I mean, I try to be hopeful, and I try to, because that's our job, right? We try to
Mhm.
present educational information. We want people to understand the issues. Otherwise, we wouldn't be doing it if we thought that no one would care or listen. So, I mean, in that capacity, I do have some hope for people having an ability to change their minds or to understand the issues at hand. But I am very concerned about the increasing corporate interest in all spheres of society. The the way that these corporate interests are becoming intertwined in every sector, whether it's academia or journalism, it's quite frightening to me that I don't know how we're going to extract ourselves from
Mhm.
that kind of a corruption. So it's going to take a lot of work.
Yeah, you guys definitely have an uphill battle to climb. But we appreciate, I know Jennifer and I and the CBC, we appreciate your work and your efforts. So appreciate that. So let's get to the meat of, what you cover, and what we cover right now, which is the big trans activism, trans debate. Let's kind of dive into that. Why do you think society at large is so accepting of the lies of trans activists? And then let's dig into, like, why do you think that the trans agenda is so harmful to women? Why do we have to protect our spaces there?
Why do people believe it is a good question. And obviously, there's different ways you can go with this. And myself, as a feminist, I tend to think that men just are granted credibility and authority on the basis of the fact that they are men to begin with. But then that authority gets backed up and supported through various institutions, such as academia. And a lot of people have talked about this, especially something called queer theory. But what I've been looking into more deeply, and I'll be the first to say that I'm not, fully well up to speed on everything. I'm educating myself, so to speak, on the history of sexology, which is just fascinating and also very dark.
Mhm.
And I see sexology as a kind of institutionalization of some very misogynist concepts and ideas. And I believe that sexology has been normalizing these various male proclivities, which can be harmful to society, to women, and to children, through the academic institutions. And I'm very concerned about that. Well, one of my investigations was specifically concerned with that, and how some of these people involved in these sexology and academia are directly influencing policies regarding the transitioning of, say, children, as well as things that should or shouldn't be considered a mental health disorder.
And I think what you're getting at here is WPATH and their new guidelines. Do you care to elaborate and talk about that a little bit more?
Sure. So I always kind of pause about where I should begin with this. It's kind of a lot of information to take in, and I want to try to make it as digestible as possible,
Yeah.
even though it's a little bit scary.
Yeah. And also, real quick, before we continue, I do want to just do a caveat for anyone listening that might be sensitive to child harm or sexual abuse, that maybe you turn off the show for now and join us on the next one. But because this is very dark and it's very important to talk about, but it is a very sensitive topic. So I just want to give a little disclaimer there for anyone who might be listening that might be triggered by that.
So, to put it bluntly, I was looking at a website that was sourced by WPATH in their new standards of care document. And when I say sourced, it's directly named and cited and used as a reference in a new chapter that they call the eunuch chapter. For those who don't know, a eunuch refers to a male who has had one or both testicles removed. It is not the same as a penectomy. Okay, so a eunuch may still have a penis, basically.
Okay. And let's back up one step even further. I always envision my mom listening to these because she does. She will have no idea what WPATH is. So maybe start with also telling us or our listeners what WPATH is and why we care.
So, WPATH is an organization that lobbies for certain medical protocols regarding what is called transitioning. So, it stands for the World Professional Association for Transgender Health. And they are very influential. They influence policies across the world, anywhere where this is being adopted, where gender identity is being adopted into policy. WPATH is involved in some capacity. They also have different branches. So they have EPATH, which is the European chapter. So they've expanded out within just a few decades. It's actually kind of remarkable how quickly they've gotten this kind of power. But yes, so they create policies. They are responsible for policies that medical institutions follow, such as hospitals and clinics.
Okay, thank you. So then you are talking about their new guidelines, specifically a new chapter that they've titled about eunuchs. So,
Right. So this draft standards of care document was released last December, and I recognized the website because of my own research into various paraphilias, or what are called fetishes, people that would understand a sexual fetish. Well, that's called a paraphilia technically. So I decided to look into it further, and what I found was that this website has been running for over 20 years. It was started sometime around in the 90s and has just actively been creating and hosting stories of extreme child pornography and torture, um, a lot of which center around castrating children, to preserve them in a childlike state and to prevent them from going through puberty. Um, I'm it's upsetting for me to talk about, of course, but just to give you some information about statistics. So there's around 10,000 stories on this site that have been created by site members and collected over the course of the past 20 years. 10,000 of them, and of that, about 4,000 are specifically tagged with minor, for children.
so this is a website that, like, because it's a little unclear to me what this website is. Is this like it's like a forum where people, just anyone, can post stories about what they might have experienced or what they like? I'm still just a little unclear.
Okay, so yeah, it is a forum. It's so because it was created in the late 90s,
Mhm.
it's still got that outdated look to it.
It's
So
like
it looks,
MySpace.
yeah. So if you can imagine it, it looks like it's from the 90s, and it's basically like an early version of Reddit,
Okay. Okay.
where you have different forum like categories and then people post in it. But can anyone join? No. They strictly kind of control access to the site. You need a password to get into the pornography story section, for example. And since I published about it, they've cracked down even harder on who can get in. So you can't even get past the splash page now without a
Mhm.
password. Um, so yeah, so I mean, it just shows that they're aware
They
that
know
what
what
they're,
they're doing.
oh, very, very much so, very
Mhm.
much so. And I I actually got an email from one of the academics involved in the site, which, you know, he really confirmed my suspicions in that email. So anyway, let me just again say that this website that has these extreme stories about, you know, raping children, castrating children, torturing them, written in an erotic capacity. The site members, the main site administrators, were invited by WPATH to speak at conferences beginning in 2009. So they have known of each other, been aware of each other, working together for over a decade now, and the academics involved in this have been resourcing from opinions of the site members. So conducting surveys, asking them what kinds of policies they would like to see enacted, and getting that information from them, and then having that used to create guidelines.
Um,
So we have, so again, this is a pedophilic, sadomasochistic group of people who excuse their desire by saying that's what they would have wanted to happen to them as children. I don't believe that. I believe that's a load of BS.
mhm.
Um, you have those people then saying, what, oh, the terms that I would like to see in the DSM, the terms that I would like to see WPATH using, and being successful in this.
Mhm.
So you know, there's decades worth of posts. It was a lot to kind of go through, but I did see that one of the academics was bragging about being invited to these conferences, but also bragging about being involved in editing the DSM-5.
Which is
So
the manual we use, right, for like psychiatrists and kind of their like diagnosing guidelines, correct?
Right. So it's the manual for diagnosing mental disorders, basically, right? And
Mhm.
within the DSM, there are sections on paraphilias or sexual disorders.
Mm.
And so this guy was involved in editing terminology related to gender dysphoria. So the decision to change gender identity disorder, the term, to something called gender dysphoria was made at the 2009 conference in Oslo, where he was in attendance. And part of the consideration for this change of terminology came from opinions from people from the Unic archives. And the significance of this cannot really be overstated, in my opinion, because what it means is that prior to this decision, gender identity disorder would have meant that you would go through counseling and therapy. It would have been treated as something that is in the mind and needs some kind of appropriate clinical response, and not just streamlining towards medical interventions such as surgeries or hormones.
Right.
So by changing it to gender dysphoria, what happened was they allowed for children to be chemically castrated without these therapies or involvement. I mean, and then in that same jump from the two editions of, again, I'm still talking about the DSM, so the
Mhm.
edition 4 and edition 5, there used to be a term in the DSM for something called scoptic syndrome. And this refers to the preoccupation with genital mutilation with a sexual interest.
Mm.
Okay, so that's specifically describing what this forum is, to be quite
Unic
frank.
archives, yeah.
That was removed, that was pulled. That is not in the updated DSM-5, that
So now
disappeared.
it's not a diagnosis at all.
So now it's not a diagnosis, and it used to be found under the gender identity disorder section.
Mm.
It's gone, and then now we have something called gender dysphoria in children instead.
Yeah.
So, I cannot explicitly prove that he was the one who edited it, but I
Mhm.
can prove that he was involved in the process, and so I
Mhm.
find it very disturbing.
So these folks who are posting and administrators of the Unic archives, these are professional, these aren't just lay people, these are professionals, so to speak, academics, medical doctors who are, is that the fair
Yes.
assessment?
Yes. So medical doctors, one who does research in cancer treatments, as well as an anthropologist.
So are they doing this to children in the name of research then? And then posting about it, or like, what's the?
So the lead academic, the one who I've described as having the influence on the DSM, the one
Mhm,
who's
mhm.
most involved with getting information through surveys, Tom Johnson. He claims to have a purely academic interest in this.
Mhm.
And in a lecture that he gave at his university, he described, now, and I don't actually believe this is true anymore. He said that he became acquainted with one person in the forum and then just began to use the forum as a source of research for his own work. But he's actually been a forum member since 2001, I think. Over 20 years he's been
Mm.
involved there, and he's posted over 8,000 times. So, and also, oh yes, before I forget, I did see that they were uploading actual MTF surgery videos as pornography to the site, and he personally was doing this, and people responded by saying that they found it very arousing to watch the genital surgeries. So when he
And these are
talks,
surgeries of actual patients, actual
these are
people.
actual, yes, like medical videos.
Wow.
And this isn't isolated either. I was shocked to find that, there are a lot of these transgender surgeries that are on pornography tube sites.
Wow. Did you just like want to scrub your eyes every day when you were doing this research? I don't think I could do it. Oh.
Yeah. Yeah. I need a vacation.
Yes, you do. So one of my biggest fears is that we are gonna start legitimizing pedophilia, basically. And I feel like this conversation I'm having with you is that you think that we're going to get there, like that will actually happen, like making that a sexual preference rather than an actual crime against children.
Oh, that's already happening. There's already a push for that. And the virtuous pedophiles is one, or there are several, but that's one organization. There's
That's
virtuous
an
pedophiles.
organization, virtuous pedophiles.
It's an organization,
Wow.
yeah. Before You Act, Prostasia, there are several of these that are mobilizing to say that pedophilia is a sexual identity, and they're becoming more and more active and vocal about this. And I strongly suspect that's because we're normalizing all kinds of paraphilias, and so they're getting the impression that it's the time is now to act again. And they're doing it under the guise of child safeguarding, just as they always have, just as they did in the 70s and 80s. They're pretending that they're concerned about the welfare of children. One recent argument I saw lately was that children can be pedophiles, and so we have to protect the child pedophiles, which is just such an interesting take, because it mirrors kind of the concept of the trans child that we see. It's like they're piggybacking off of each other in that capacity. But yeah, they're saying that in order to protect children, we need to destigmatize pedophilia and offer these people medical treatment and help to prevent them from offending. So it's mixed in with this kind of language that would make you think, oh, well, yeah, they're trying to do the right thing. So of course, we should try to prevent offending. When in reality, then they're also lobbying for things like child sex dolls to be made legal, and for AI child pornography to be made legal. And that frontier is actually quite terrifying. The AI replicated child pornography that can look very, very realistic.
Makes my
But they're
stomach
saying
hurt.
that no one is harmed by these things, which is false. And research has shown that this view that what's called the catharsis theory, the idea that if they're able to access these certain materials that they wouldn't actually hurt children, has been shown to be false, because you're basically training yourself to be more and more interested into this kind of activity, and it actually heightens the arousal response further and further. So I mean, it's just absolute, can I say bullshit? It's
Yeah.
bullshit. So
Well, the same was true for women, right? I saw that you've had oh my goodness, I can't believe I'm blanking on her name, but she does research with women sex dolls and the same kind of thing for women. And we've seen that's not good for women. So why do we think this would be good for children or for anyone? Caitlin.
yeah, and yeah, Caitlin Roper. Yeah, and
Yeah.
her book is just coming out this week. Yeah, about sex dolls and robots, and yeah, I would recommend it. But yeah, I do kind of see a sort of a connection between the gender identity movement and this pro pedophilia movement. Obviously, they're using similar language and similar rationale for example, the child, using children and protecting children to kind of push adult uh, paraphilias and fetishes onto society. Yes.
So what are your thoughts about, because we're talking about kids now, and I've been kind of we have a new baby, and so I'm already thinking about school, which is crazy. But I'm watching the news and I'm watching all this play out, and I'm watching people and parents get upset about what's being taught in schools. And Kelly J. Keene just got on YouTube and was talking about this young lady who, or this child who had attempted suicide twice, and the school was helping her, you know, change genders, and without her parents' consent. So what is your thought about all this that's being taught in schools, especially like different sex education and the genderbread man and all of the, like, are we allowing now kind of like this pornography inside schools, and what's your thought there?
To be honest, whenever people ask what can be done here, I really draw a blank because it's not just the schools, it's society. I mean, there's a mass grooming going on, to be serious. Like, I know I'm not using that word lightly. You know,
Mhm.
it gets thrown around a lot as a kind of an insult these days. But what I see is that the fetishists are actually grooming the clinicians. The pedophiles are grooming the people who are supposed to be treating them, the therapists,
Mm.
and likewise the male fetishists who eroticize women's identity are grooming society. And then, you know, of course, that's in the schools. How do we get it out? I mean, I honestly have no idea. I struggle with that because if they're not getting it in school, then they're getting it from their friends or they're getting it through Discord groups. So I've heard stories about Discord groups where this will come up, even if it's not a group related to this. So like some kind of video game group, and the
Mm.
kids are talking to their friends and it'll come up. I've actually personally seen a Discord group where an adult was telling children how to get DIY hormones without their parents knowing. It's we're screwed. I mean, we really have to.
There's the Senate coming up.
We have to start, you know, talking more about
Yeah.
this, and it's out there in the open. So we have to combat some of this propaganda that children are being faced with. It's a really unfortunate situation. But yes, parents should probably try to work together, team up, form coalitions. I would even suggest try to keep religion out of it, because as soon as you bring that onto the table, then people are going to discredit you.
Mhm.
There's plenty of arguments that can be made without having to bring up personal beliefs into it, because we have reality on our side. You know,
Right.
this is absurd. We just have to point out how absurd it is. So yeah.
Yeah. Why do you think, I'm going to back up a little bit. We kind of went real deep into kind of the roots of some of this evil. Why do you think that we see men coming into women's spaces? And I brought up the locker room, the YMCA locker room of a male entering the female space, but I don't see it so much the other way. I don't see women, even though there are women who are wanting to be men or identify as men, but we don't see this big outcry as far as them entering men's spaces. Can you talk a little bit more about why that is and what the danger is explicitly for, you know, men coming into women's spaces, specifically prisons? You don't see a lot of women trying to get into men's prisons, but the opposite is happening, and it's at quite an alarming speed. And crazily, like, crimes against women, like these men are doing crimes against women and then getting into women's prisons. But anyway, can you talk a little bit about that dichotomy or that difference?
Right. Well, the reason that we focus so much on men is because men pose a threat to women. Women don't pose a threat to men. Just bottom line. It's pretty obvious. And that's why, you know, there are women in California and in New Jersey prisons that are identifying as men and not getting transferred in. It's very much a policy that privileges men and over women in every way. And like you said, yeah, some of the crimes that these men have committed are so ghastly. It's just hard to even talk about. Like Marcelin Harvey, I don't know if you saw this case, but a man who, this is in New York, which New York is now starting to implement the prison policies. He has a history of he's a serial killer of
Right.
women, and he specifically he had targeted a prostitute woman in the past, which tends to be kind of a pattern for male serial killers. But anyway, he killed 3 women, dismembered their bodies, and has now been transferred into the Rikers women's section while awaiting trial. You know, now fortunately he's about 80 years old, so he's probably pretty frail. Who knows if he'll even live to see his court date? I don't know, but just the callous disregard for women and for women's safety. It's just such a massive insult to women. Another man that I'd reported on, named Perry Surf, is in the Edna Mahan, New Jersey women's prison for, again, killing a prostituted woman. But he was found driving her car, wearing her clothing, and had put his own photo over hers on her ID, and was transferred to the women's prison. He even accepted another 10 years onto his sentence to get his rape conviction removed from his record. So he's serving a 50-year prison sentence for this brutal murder. And he was concerned about going to prison on a sex charge for his own safety. Ha, right? So he was able to get that pulled from his record and is now in the women's prison and has since married a woman. They're living together in the prison, and he's married her, and is by reports from women who have talked to me, terrorizing women within the prison, harassing them, just and he's had the surgery as well. So he actually attempted to self-castrate and then was given the surgery. So there's this weird concept that some people seem to believe that, if there's enough medical dedication to this farce, that makes them less of a threat. And in some cases it's quite worse, actually, because if you're that mentally unstable that you would do certain, of course, I'm not speaking for 100% of people, but I am saying that does exist. There are people, like I've just mentioned, who have certain sadomasochistic inclinations, and that makes them more dangerous, actually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then in California, you don't even, from what I understand, you don't even have to have had. I agree. It's a lie to think that if you've had the surgery, then great, you can do what you wish. You're no longer a threat. That I agree with you. But even in California, you don't even have to have committed to that, I don't believe, to be placed in. They were handing out condoms. That was a big thing earlier this year, I guess, in California. Women's prisons. Why do women's prisons need condoms? Men shouldn't be in there to be using them. So it's very frustrating. What can women and men do? What can we do to help fight this? I can't just think, and I know you can't think either, that we just throw up our hands. It's why you created Redux. It's why you do the research that you do. But do you have an answer to that? What can men and women do? How can we stop this train?
Yeah, I would just say to try to keep talking about it more and more, and specifically to understand this is a nonpartisan issue. This is an issue of reality. And again, I would just recommend, I personally don't have anything against people's personal religious beliefs, but I do think that in discussing this, we should keep that out of that, and try to keep it just like to understand the arguments well and to be able to present them well is enough, because there are so many problems with this that it's really quite simple to pick this apart and expose why this is wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that we need to consider how we present the information as well, and try to present it in a way that is based in some research and some actual experiences and facts, which we have. And to just keep talking about it. I do think it will start to crumble pretty quickly if we take that approach, because it's built on lies. It's built on fabrications. So if we just expose the truth to this, then yeah, hopefully hopefully we'll start to see some changes happening. I mean, I feel a little bit more hopeful this year than I did last year, don't you?
Yeah, oh, definitely. We are getting ready to release our new film, The Detransition Diaries. And even in creating that film, I felt more hopeful because I feel like there are more voices coming forward saying this happened to me and it was wrong. And I feel used by the medical system. I feel abused by the medical system. I was failed. And so to me, it breaks my heart that there are men and women and even boys and girls who had to go through this and will now be probably medicalized for life. But I'm grateful that they're starting to have courage to speak out. And that, I think that's the hard thing. And I think that's why, again, people like you and creating spaces to talk about this, it's hard. People are getting canceled for having an opinion on this, even a well-versed, well thought out, well articulated conversation about it. They're being canceled. I spoke with a therapist who was on the very far left, and like you said, it goes across the aisle and different party lines, but she was on the very far left and was taking all the trainings on taking care of gender identity, folks with gender identity issues, and was like, wait a second, this doesn't make, I can't do this anymore. And now she's speaking out and she's going through some stuff. And so it's just kind of scary. I think you hit on this earlier too about the pedophiles and those folks are driving the narrative, and they're I don't know if they're intimidating physicians or they're but they're the kind of the ones driving the narrative, and it's got to stop, because yeah. And I think medical providers are maybe a little bit afraid to say stop, because they're afraid of what might happen to their careers. I mean, these are people who've gone to school, spent a lot of money to take care of people. The last thing they want to, do is be called a bigot or feel like they're being attacked and then canceled. So it's kind of a scary place to be. But I am more hopeful this year, because I do think people are hopefully starting to speak out. But I think, yeah.
The Tavistock, that was huge. And, it looks like something about 1,000 families are going to be suing for medical
Yes.
malpractice. Let's go, US. Let's do this.
Yeah.
Let's take WPATH to court. I'm not kidding. It
Yeah.
needs to start.
And I think so. At the end of our last film, Transmission, What's the Rush to Reassign Gender, where Megan Murphy's in that film, at the very end, it's like, that's what they say. It's like, I think the only way this is only going to end if money and lawsuits, really start happening, and that's the only way it can end. And it's, so far he's predicting the future a little bit, which is great. And also the big warning that they slapped on puberty blockers this year, that was a big win as well. I mean, let's stop prescribing them, but at least there's a warning now. Go ahead.
Sorry, just before we end, I just wanted to ask you a quick question about that, because, in your work, you look at some of the implications and health effects of surrogacy. And I know that Lupron, which is a very commonly used puberty blocker in the US, is used during surrogacy. So could you just kind of talk about that for a second?
Yeah. Well, I think it's still going to be used. It still is used, and it has its own set of side effects as well. Man, I wasn't prepared to answer questions. I was doing the one asking. No, but yeah. So I think, I guess what specifically would you like to know or ask me about?
Well, I mean, Lupron has had some very serious effects on women and their health,
Yes.
And I'm a little bit concerned that when all of this stuff starts to blow over and the puberty blockers are called into question, I wonder what's going to happen for women. Are women going to be ignored in all of this in some way?
Here's my cynical side. I think they will. I think that we're going to continue down that path. Women are largely, I don't want to say ignored, but we're over medicalized. We are under and over treated at the same time, misdiagnosed maybe, and then over treated. Research in women's health is severely lacking. For the longest time, studies largely only used men. And that's another thing with the trans debate is it is important. Biology is important when we're doing studies to advance medicine. Like, is this on a female body? Is this on a male body? And what are the side effects? So the cynical side of me thinks that yes, I don't think it will change for women, unfortunately, because also not only do we have to conquer the puberty blocker and the gender industry, but you also then have to conquer big fertility as well. So when you start talking about Lupron and women's health, because they are the big profiteers in that world, and I think big fertility is also they have their hands in their pocket too, as far as gender identity, because of these surgeries. Young girls are now, and young boys are infertile. So then, sometimes they undergo fertility preservation, sperm and egg banking, and so the pockets are starting to combine. And so I'm a little bit cynical that women are going to be taken care of, but maybe that's the next step. Maybe first we deal with it here, and then hopefully start caring more about women. Because another reason I'm cynical too is because egg donors, they're put on, and donors, I always like to make sure I do my air quotes because they're not donors. They're put on drugs that are very harmful to their bodies. And we've been doing that for a very long time. And these are young women, college-age women, healthy women, and now are having cancer diagnosis and other health issues. And we still don't have a tracking database for those women. We still don't see them being cared for the way that they should. So that's why I'm cynical.
Well, I did want to just throw that in there too, as just a reminder, that this industry, it harms women in so many ways. And I think that perhaps the surrogacy aspect, it's not quite as visible to a lot of people. So yeah, thank you for your work on that.
Yeah, of course. And I think, I think you're right. I think that I'm glad you actually asked that question, because I think it is important that people understand where the deep pockets are and who is benefiting from all of this. And big fertility, that's what we call it, is one, like big pharma. Big pharma, I think, is benefiting from the hormones and the puberty blockers and that sort of thing. And then big fertility is now benefiting. And that's so sad. We talked to in our film, a little spoiler alert, but with Grace, a young woman who is detransitioned, and she talks about her fear that she won't be able to have children now, and that just breaks my heart. And I watched another video of a young woman talking about how she's afraid she won't be able to breastfeed if she does decide to have children. And it's just, you can't be making these types of decisions when you're small. You can't be thinking at 12 and 13 that you want a family or you don't want a family. And it's just breaking my heart. So how about we end on some sort of positive note? Do you have anything else you'd like to tell our listeners? Actually, how about you tell them about your brand new merchandise that you got up and running this week? What's in there? So Redux has a merch site. Go for it.
Yeah, we're really excited. We just launched the merch site, and we have 2 t-shirts that are specially designed. Pro woman t-shirts. We have a keychain that's a kind of like a self-defense keychain.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So check it out. It's different from our actual website. So the link is reduxmerch.info. So you can find everything there. And there is a discount code, which is FCKTWTR. And you can get 10% off.
I love it. That's amazing. That is great. And we'll include those links when the podcast goes live, and the comments are in the description so people can find it. But yeah, so our time with Genevieve has come to an end, and it's been a wonderful time, even if it has been very deep and a little depressing. But please do hop on over to her website, reduxx.info to sign up for the newsletter and to read all that you guys are offering there. And then mosey on over to Redux. Again, that's Reduxx merch.info to browse through the merch that supports independent pro-women, pro-child journalism. You can also find and listen to Women's Voices, the podcast on Spotify. And so we encourage our listeners to do so. Genevieve, thank you again for taking the time to speak with me and for doing what you do on Redux. I appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. Thank you.
I would also just like to thank all of our listeners and subscribers. May you continue to facilitate discussion in your own lives, and may you think beyond the masses.